Hello TTR fans, this is going to be my attempt at a video of putting a TTR carb back in. First off, I'm going to check that the carb doesn't leak after its rebuild. Much easier to fix any leaks before it gets back on the bike and you have to take it off again. The usual areas are around the float bowl, where there's quite a complex gasket, easy enough to replace and not too expensive if necessary. If when you take your bowl off you find the gasket flattened, then you're in need of a new gasket, sourced of course from Steve at Totally TTRs. Similarly, the other area that might leak is at the bottom of the carb where the diaphragm fits, and there are two little O-rings and they're so cheap they're always worth putting in new on a rebuild. If it leaks because of a damaged diaphragm edge, then bad luck, that's a fairly expensive bit to replace. So switch on the petrol and leave it for a few moments and see if any leaks appear. Even if you don't see drips, the best check sometimes is just with your finger or visually. If you see an area getting dark, then you've got a leak. I'll leave it for a few moments now. I haven't got my trusty assistant to hold the camera, so this is going to be a bit awkward. I'm just going to do one more check, which is that now that the carb bowl is filled with petrol, that the acceleration jack, the diaphragm, is working. And if you see the little brass protuberance at the bottom of the carb mouth, then petrol should squirt from that when I operate the throttle lever. And yes, that works fine. Just draining off the petrol, and that goes in my can of petrol that I use on the mower, so not too worried if there are any little bits and pieces or debris in there. Today's deliberate mistake, I'd forgotten to switch off the petrol, so I had a constant flow, but at least it shows that the float is working. Right, that was a bit of a disaster. The carb didn't leak, but trying to do the petrol drain with one hand, I managed to drop the can of petrol, and you'll see from the floor I probably lost a quarter of a gallon before I managed to recover the situation. Anyways, as I say, my carb didn't leak, so I'm going to be able to put it on. Before doing so, because of all the steel parts, I've just given it a spray of WD-40. So first of all, on with the cables. I put the long cable in first, as that's easiest. Fittings on the Venhill, I've got Dakar high bars, so I've got the long Venhill cables again from Totally TTRs, and the plating on them is very good. I haven't had any rust on the nuts, bolt and threads, which is surprising bearing in mind the amount of spannering they've had on them as I've been putting different carbs on to test. This one, the return cable is always a little bit more fiddly, but let's see, hopefully we'll get there. Sometimes you need three hands for this. The first cable tightens up with a 10mm. I've done that, haven't I? Yeah, it just doesn't hurt to check. And the second one with an 8mm. You just pull it to one side. You can do it most of the way up by hand, which is a lot easier obviously. putting the carb back on is definitely not a 5-minute job as the strip down is. I haven't got the little cover on properly. Make sure to do them up reasonably tight, and I can check for play later. Don't forget to pull down the rubber protective cover. And right, we're ready to pop the carb in. I can never remember which way in is the easiest way, but get the pipes back out the way and it'll go in one way or the other, that's for sure, because it knows where it's got to go. Get the cables up, and there's a little bit of WD-40 on the carb and the inlet rubber, so it should slide in fairly easy like that. Then just twist it around, because there's a locating lug on the inlet manifold that engages with protuberance on the carb, so that seems about right, so that's okay. If you come around the back, I'll just show putting on the drain pipes. You okay? Right, the rear one is always a bit of a fiddle, so I try to do it without swearing. I've got petrol dripping out of the fuel line, which isn't good. Because it's such a fiddle, I try and do this without taking the clip off, and maybe that isn't always the best idea, but it's on. So, second overflow or breather pipe is much easier to put on. So that's done. Next job is to put in on the air box. Again, this is probably the bit I find most difficult, because the hole doesn't seem ever to be big enough, and I find it difficult to line up the securing bolts sometimes. But make sure the breather pipes are out the way and that the airbox boot sits nicely over the carb. That looks good. So make sure all the wires, cables are in the right place. Got the diodes stuck. That's roughly okay. And now for my struggle to get the securing bolts in. I use a screwdriver to try and force the airbox into place, just to make sure that the boot is on. Don't forget the breather pipe connection, and let's hope today goes a little easier. Right, one of the two long bolts goes in, if you're lucky, at the back. Right, that seems to be it. That was a bit quicker than I normally manage. Again, centre up the bolt holes with the screwdriver. Something fell off, I don't know what that was. Probably the clip on the breather pipe, and then around the side
Can't see what I'm doing there.
Again, this is always seems a bit tricky. It's like as if the airbox is slightly too big or something. But, there we go. That's probably the most difficult bit of the job. 10mm socket. Loosely do that one up. I tighten this one first. This bolt first to get things central, and then go on to the others. The other two, as I say, two long bolts on the top and a short bolt on the side. That's that. Then it's the fiddle of trying to get the CDI to sit in properly. It's quite tight with the wires, but yeah, that looks okay. I can take my spacer bit of wood out, and again, I always find this a bit of a struggle. Hopefully today, there we go. Tank strap back on. Right, where are we now? Need to. I haven't worked out what fell yet, but I heard something tinkle. On with the oil pipe again. This is where you need small hands. That went okay, and the breather pipe clips on there. Right, we're looking okay. Everything's central. Petrol pipe on. Tighten up the Jubilee clip. Some people use the spring clips, but I don't get on too well with those, so I use these Jubilee clips. Right, mustn't forget these. I don't know what the correct screwdriver is for them. I never get one. Managed to find one that fits the heads nicely, and they do spin a little bit. And the airbox, just make sure it's all sitting in nicely. Yeah. This Jubilee clip hasn't got a connector, so I hold it to stop it spinning, put a bit of pressure on it. That's done up tight, so I'll just go back to the front one, because I undo them quite a long way to make sure that I can get the carb out easy without putting a strain on the rubber inlet stub. Last thing you want to do is for the rubber to separate or be pulled off the aluminium stub where it attaches to the engine. Right, that's tight, the carb's tight. It's now on with the frame support. Again, I use the screwdriver to centralize things. Because I've got the frame guards, it's a 10mm bolt at the front, but it's a standard 12mm at the top. It's just a question of tightening those up. It's tempting to test ride the bike without the strut on, but that leaves you open to possibly twisting the frame, so don't be tempted. Put it back on before you test ride. At this stage you could, if you wanted, test start the bike, but I'm totally confident in my carb, haha, famous last words. So we'll carry on. Seat back on. Sometimes a little bit difficult to hook it in underneath the petrol tank. And my long-headed seat belts. I sometimes find it difficult to get the seat far enough forward to get the locating holes to put the nuts on, but thank goodness today I'm okay. Feeling slightly nervous because after doing this it'll be a test startup, and as I'm leading a trail ride tomorrow for my brother and 4 mates, this has got to perform so I don't leave them stranded in the middle of the eastern countryside. So hand tight with the bolts and then nip up with the socket. Right, test fire up. I'll try it with a bit of choke. Fingers crossed. Yeah, that's fine. I'm not going to do any more because I'm in an enclosed space and I don't want to poison myself. So there it is, carb back in. I can put the side panels on and go and enjoy my trail ride. Thank you very much for watching.